The chaos seemed to grow louder with every passing day, swirling around Jake Paul's search for a replacement opponent as if the entire combat sports world had been thrown off balance. What began as a scramble to salvage a blockbuster event quickly morphed into one of the strangest matchmaking sagas modern boxing had ever seen. And at the center of it all stood two names that could not be farther apart in size, background, and sheer physical danger. The YouTuber-turned-boxer Jake Paul and the heavyweight wrecking machine Francis Ngannou. The mere suggestion of pairing them together sent shockwaves across podcasts, analyst panels, and social media, igniting debate among fans and fighters who knew exactly what such a confrontation would imply. Joe Rogan's stunned reaction to the news only amplified the absurdity of the situation. When he heard that Jake Paul's camp had reached out to Francis Ngannou to replace Gervonta Davis, even Rogan was taken aback. The idea felt unreal, like a scenario ripped straight from a parody script rather than a legitimate promotional strategy. Revealing the details on his podcast, Rogan emphasized how utterly unthinkable it would be for Paul to willingly walk into the fists of a man responsible for some of the most devastating knockouts the UFC had ever witnessed. Francis wasn't just another big name. He was a force of nature whose punches carried the weight of a heavyweight division in every swing. Rogan admitted that while the spectacle would be massive, the risk bordered on reckless, especially for a fighter whose entire career had been built around calculated matchups and measured steps up in competition. Behind the scenes, Jake Paul and his team were scrambling to stabilize a rapidly collapsing event. Once Tank Davis's legal situation made the November date impossible, Paul's camp began scouring the landscape for a replacement. Someone with star power, someone with credibility, someone who could save the show. But the universe of viable opponents seemed to shrink by the hour. As names like Nate Diaz, Ryan Garcia, and Terrence Crawford circulated, the idea of calling Francis Ngannou emerged from the fog like a desperate last-ditch solution rather than a strategic move. Reporters and analysts were stunned that the conversation had even reached that point. Going from a lightweight like Gervonta Davis to a massive heavyweight like Ngannou wasn't just a jump in weight class. It was a shift into a completely different dimension. Michael Bisping didn't mince words when he examined the absurdity of the situation, pointing out how Jake Paul had spent years fighting smaller, older, or past their prime opponents. Moving from someone like Gervonta Davis, who fights at around 135 pounds, to a giant like Ngannou, who walks around at 260 and hits like a truck, bordered on fantasy. Bisping acknowledged that if Paul took the fight, he would give him his respect, but he couldn't hide his disbelief. The spectrum was simply too wide. One moment Paul was preparing for a lightweight, the next, he was supposedly considering a heavyweight whose punch had once sent Tyson Fury to the canvas. For Bisping, the story didn't add up, and the logic was stretched beyond reason. Ultimately, it was Francis Ngannou himself who shut the door with a simple explanation. The fight made no sense. In Ngannou's eyes, the offer came out of nowhere and landed so awkwardly that it felt almost disrespectful. He wasn't chasing paydays, he wasn't chasing clout, and he certainly wasn't looking to step into a hastily arranged event that didn't align with his goals. Having just boxed Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, Ngannou had carved out a new high-level identity in combat sports, not as a gimmick, but as a legitimate crossover athlete. Fighting Jake Paul would undo all of that. It wasn't the money, it was the mismatch in purpose. That mismatch is exactly what legends like Daniel Cormier warned about. Cormier's reaction was sharp, direct, and protective. He made it clear that Jake Paul had no business in the ring with Francis Ngannou under any circumstances, let alone on short notice. Ngannou's power isn't the type a fighter can prepare for in a few weeks. It's the type that ends nights, careers, and sometimes consciousness with a single punch. Cormier acknowledged Paul's ambition, but stressed that ambition alone wasn't enough to withstand the kind of danger Ngannou brings. Even Tyson Fury struggled with that power, and if a fighter of Fury's size and pedigree could be dropped by one clean shot, what chance would Jake Paul have? As analysts dug deeper into the story, a common theme emerged. This entire situation exposed the fragility of spectacle-driven boxing. Gervonta Davis's collapse had triggered a chain reaction that rippled through promoters, broadcasters, sponsors, advertisers, and venues. Millions of dollars in marketing, production, staging, travel, and promotion evaporated overnight. Tim Bradley didn't hold back in his criticism, calling Davis's actions financially catastrophic and pointing out how many people had already invested resources they might never get back. The fallout wasn't just about two fighters. It was about the infrastructure of an event that had been constructed on shaky ground from the beginning. As the dust settled, some analysts pointed out the troubling pattern. Jake Paul's career had always revolved around matchups engineered to balance risk with spectacle. But this time, the equation was off. The pivot from Tank Davis to Francis Ngannou felt chaotic, rushed, and misaligned with boxing norms. Jake's willingness to posture toward Ngannou may have been intended as a display of bravado, a way to keep his name buzzing, but critical voices across the combat sports world questioned whether the strategy had finally overstayed its welcome. The novelty was wearing thin, and fans were beginning to see through the choreography. Even those who admired Jake's showmanship couldn't deny the reality. The size difference was astronomical. The skill discrepancy was glaring. And the preparation required to face someone like Ngannou wasn't something that could be conjured up in a few weeks of emergency training. Boxing, at the highest level, demands calculated precision, not last-minute gambles with heavyweight monsters. Jake Paul, despite his progress and discipline, was still operating in that gray space between entertainment and legitimate competition. A fight with Ngannou would shove him into the deep end with weights tied to his ankles. And yet, the idea was mesmerizing. The possibility, however unrealistic, created a spectacle that fed the imaginations of fans, analysts, and content creators across the globe. That intrigue alone was a testament to the magnetic lure of crossover combat sports. But once the noise settled, the truth remained unchanged. Some fights make sense, and some fights simply should never happen. With all the chaos surrounding Jake Paul's next move, the question becomes not who he could face, but who he should face. Is this matchup a thrilling, high-risk event, or a mismatch that crosses the line of competitiveness? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the drama unraveling behind the scenes, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another breakdown. Your support keeps the stories going.